Hey all, thank you guys so much for joining me on this April Fool's Day. I will say I already been pranked by the internet this morning. Not really appreciative of that, but hope you guys are having a great Wednesday so far. So again, I'm Sarah Grace, looking forward to spending this hour with you. We should have plenty of time at the end for questions, so I'm hopeful to dive into that. As we talk about food insecurity, I think the most important thing would be that we start with kind of a brief overview of what food insecurity is. So, going to kind of dive into a little bit of data and definitions with you. So, you may notice in food insecurity that people often use these words like hunger and food insecurity interchangeably. You may have noticed that I work for the Hunger Solutions Institute, but we work on food and nutrition insecurity, which your brain may be saying, what is the difference in this? So happy to talk a little bit about that. So hunger is that like physical sensation, right, of not consuming enough food or dietary energy. And then food insecurity specifically is the lack of consistent access to enough food for a healthy, active life. That is the definition given to us by the USDA, US Department of Agriculture. The best way I can describe it is that there are kind of two types of food insecurity. So your first type is going to be quality. So people who may be food insecure may be reducing the quality of food that they're eating. You may think about like perhaps I am eating 3 meals a day, but those 3 meals a day are not nutritionally sound, right? So maybe I'm eating like ramen noodles 3 times a day because that's cheap and affordable and I can eat that. But it's certainly not like satiating me and providing the correct nutrients for my body, I guess would be the best way to say that. And then the more severe form of food insecurity is when people are reducing the quantity of food that they are eating. So that would be eating maybe only once or twice a day, not eating for a full day, things of that nature, maybe splitting their meals in half to share with another person or a child. That is often common as well. And then another thing that is sometimes kind of lumped in with these conversations is malnutrition. And malnutrition is specifically like inadequate vitamins, minerals, diet-related disease, things of that nature. I do think it's important to note, oftentimes when we're thinking about people who are food insecure, I think we have this image, right, of people who are reducing the quantity of food that they're eating, therefore they will be underweight, which is often not the case. A lot of people who are food insecure may actually be average weight or overweight because of the quick access, cheaper foods that maybe have like a lot of sodium or high fat content, things like that, versus I think we all know, right? Like going to the store, the things that cost me the most money is produce, right? Like fresh vegetables, fruits, things like that. One other thing to note on this slide, I know this is a lot of information for the beginning. We won't go this hard the whole time. Is we're now moving into a conversation talking about nutrition insecurity. So not just food insecurity, but nutrition insecurity. And I'm going to read this definition to you because I think this is really, really helpful. So nutrition security is where everyone has consistent and equitable access to healthy, safe, affordable foods that promote well-being, prevent diseases, and if needed, treat it. Going beyond just having enough food security, to focus on nutritional quality, affordability, and health equity, especially for vulnerable groups. So moving into that like food justice area, I also think about having like culturally appropriate foods, things of that would all fall within nutrition security. So just wanted to touch on that briefly as well. Okay. So there are kind of four types of hunger. Short-term hunger is that like transitory, mild form of hunger, temporarily affecting mental and physical capacity. If you think about like maybe last week was a really, really busy week for you and you worked through lunch. That would be an example of short-term hunger. I imagine by the end of the day, you were perhaps not as energized as you might normally be. You may also have been a little bit grumpy or a little bit sleepy, all those kinds of things. And then acute hunger is where people are experiencing hunger for like short periods, usually due to like some kind of natural incident like shock, drought, conflict, things like that. If you think about a couple years ago when there was, I believe it was after a hurricane, and then there was a lot of flooding in like Appalachia, and people were trapped in their homes for several days. That could be an example of acute hunger, where maybe you weren't necessarily prepared for that, and so lacked the food that you needed for yourself or your family. And then chronic hunger, that's where people, this is their normal condition, right? They are experiencing like long-term chronic food insecurities. That is chronic. And then hidden hunger is sort of that like malnutrition kind of tied in piece, right? Where maybe people are consuming the right amount of calories, again, but not the right amount of nutrients for their body. Okay. And then you have 4 dimensions of food security, which I think is really helpful to think about too. So one is that physical availability of food. So is there food close to you? And then 2 would be the economic and physical access to food. So do you have the money to go to the store, but do you also have the physical means to get to the store? Do you live in a rural area where it costs or where, you know, it takes a lot of time? There's that time poverty that people aren't necessarily considering, right? Where you're having to commute to the grocery store, or maybe you rely on public transit to get to the store, things like that. And then the third part is food utilization. So that's sort of a systems level, like waste and systems wide issues. And then the 4th dimension, stability, is all 3 of those other dimensions over time. So let's say typically you're doing really well, but you lose your job. And so then you've lost your sort of economic access to food, right? That becomes your budget becomes tighter. Or let's say typically okay, maybe you live in a rural area and you and your best friend go to the grocery store every Sunday, but she is sick and you can't get to the store. So you've lost your physical access to get to the grocery store. So that's stability over time. And then I kind of touched on this earlier, but I think it is important to remember that link between poverty and obesity. And I'm sorry, for some reason, this graphic has gotten a little blurry when it's blown up, but just showing how all these things are interrelated together, right? Food insecurity, stress, weight gain, obesity, chronic disease are all linked into poverty. And so I really encourage everyone to think about what is the cost of healthy eating. I think we all know that even, you know, especially this year, right, our grocery costs have been rising and rising. What are you cutting back on? You know, what are you making the choice to purchase? I think about like, if I only had $10, could I go to the grocery store and buy myself a healthy, nutritious meal for me? Probably, probably. But if I had $10 to feed me and my spouse and a child, probably not. I don't think I could get enough food for 3 people for $10. I also think about where you shop, right? Like, will $10 get me further shopping at Aldi versus shopping at Publix versus shopping at Walmart? Or, you know, is the only store near me a Dollar General? Is that the only thing I have access to? So just considering all of those factors. So now moving into talking about hunger in the United States as a whole, I think this is helpful kind of as we frame our discussion about Alabama to kind of have an idea of what's going on in the United States as a whole. Okay, so this is the United States average of food insecurity. This is the kind of most recent collection of data from the USDA. And if you don't know, this fall, the USDA announced that they would no longer be doing the annual food insecurity survey across the United States. So we will no longer have this data moving forward. So this is the most recent collection of data that we have. Okay, so looking at the average food insecurity across the United States, state by state, is 12.2. Alabama is 11.5, so just slightly below average. So you'll see the green states are states that are well below average. The blue states are states that are well above average. And then your gray states are states that are like right around average, which is what Alabama is. I would encourage you to notice that all the blue states are in the South. So all those states with high food insecurity are in the South. All the states with low food insecurity, those below the average, are up north or on the West Coast. So just think about that as we move forward. Okay, and then I always think it is important to put some context in this. So this graph on the left is trends in food insecurity by race and ethnicity. So your blue line at the very top is percent of food insecure households that are Black or non-Hispanic. And then your orange line is Hispanic. And then green is your average of all households. Brown is other non-Hispanic. And then purple is white non-Hispanic. So I think this pretty clearly highlights, at least to me, the race inequality within food insecurity. And then if you'll look at the graph on the right, this also looks at food insecurity by household composition. So that top line is the female head with children, so like a single mom, or the red, and then the red line is male head of household with children. And then the blue line is that average of all households. And then below that, you have like women living alone, men living alone, so on and so forth, households with no children. So, and I think that graph on the right, this one clearly highlights two things to me. One would be the cost of childcare and children in general, right? They're more likely to experience food insecurity, I think, because they simply have more costs. And then two, you'll notice how much higher that green line is for women over the red line for men. And that to me clearly highlights that wage gap for women, right? We know that women are not paid as much as men. And I think that this really highlights that as well. Okay. This is just some quick information looking at the prevalence and distribution of food insecurity by education status. So I know a lot of us are really interested in like what are barriers to success? How do we get more students into college? How do we get them that education? And basically you can see from this graph that the more education you have, the less likely you are to be food insecure. So I think that those kind of go hand in hand. And then the bottom graphs, the pie charts, the one on the left is sort of what I was talking about, where people are reducing the quality of food. That's food insecurity in general. And then the very low food insecurity, that is where people are reducing the quantity of food. So that's kind of how I differentiate it, because I think that makes more sense to those of you who are not in the weeds of food insecurity. Okay, so in Alabama specifically, 1 in 6 people face hunger and 1 in 4 children face hunger. And this information came from Feeding America, if that interests you. So I think that is always helpful to know. And then this is looking at food insecurity rates over time in Alabama. You will notice on this lovely graph that since 2020, food insecurity rates have gone down. Now, I will just say, caveat to that, we all know that there were a lot of additional programs, a lot more like waivers for SNAP available to people during COVID. And then since this data has been collected, all that programming has stopped, right? It has gone back to quote normal. We quit offering those programs, those resources. So maybe food insecurity in Alabama has gone down, but I'm also curious, maybe it hasn't. Maybe we simply were providing more services to people so that less people were experiencing food insecurity. I hope that's making sense. Okay. And then I'm going to move quickly into talking about SNAP and welfare as a whole. So welfare is this term that people like to use in the United States that really just refers to government programs that provide like financial or other assistance to people who need assistance. That is straightforward. That's what it is. There is not like a welfare specific program. There's a lot of things that fall underneath that. People use that term kind of loosely. So SNAP is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Some people refer to SNAP as food stamps. Some people refer to it as EBT. That is all the same thing, all exactly the same thing. It is called SNAP, so that is what I'm going to call it. But if you have heard it by another name, at least now you know what I'm talking about. Something else to keep in mind that I always like to tell people who may not be familiar with SNAP is that you cannot buy prepared food on SNAP. So me personally, I don't like to cook. My husband is the chef of our family. Thank you so much to him. When it is my turn to cook, when I have to cook for our family, I usually buy a rotisserie chicken and a bagged salad mix. And I cut up some rotisserie chicken, debone rotisserie chicken, put it over a salad, and I say, voila, she is a chef. It's a good meal, okay? But I'm not saying that I'm doing a great job. If I were on SNAP, I could not buy a rotisserie chicken because that would be considered prepared food. So I want you to also consider, even though someone may be receiving SNAP, they still have to purchase their food, take it home, cook it, prepare it. They do not get to often buy things that are considered like more convenient or already prepared with their SNAP dollars. Okay, so this is looking at SNAP households in the millions. So you will see again where these rates kind of went up and then have kind of tapered off a little bit around 2020. That's total SNAP households. And then the next highest is people with children. And then the next highest, the green, is with elderly people. So you're thinking about the majority of people receiving SNAP are not just supporting themselves, but also other people who typically are not working, right? Kids, they don't work. Elderly people, they're not working. So they're supporting several people on SNAP. Okay. And then this is looking at the household state averages for SNAP benefits. The national average of what someone on SNAP receives is $230. In Alabama, it's $241. That's a monthly average. I could not buy my groceries on $241. Maybe you can. And if you can, if you would please send me where you're shopping and what your grocery list is, I would really appreciate it. I would love to know your cost cutting tips. Maybe start a blog because I think a lot of people would be interested in that. But I think this is something I think that's always really interesting is we kind of have this idea of what people are receiving, but oftentimes SNAP dollars are not covering all of someone's grocery expenses. Okay. And then this is a percentage of participating SNAP households with children. I think this is particularly interesting for this audience, knowing that we are trying to support these currently children, right, in going into college, and they will lose SNAP access, right, when they are on their own in college. They will no longer often receive benefits through their parents. So the national average of SNAP households with children is 38. In Alabama, it's 45. So almost half of people receiving SNAP in Alabama are doing so for them and their family. Oh, goodness, sorry, that's popping up for y'all. Okay. And then, all right. This is always something that I like to think about. So why are people hungry here? We have a lot of food. We constantly see in the United States that we have a lot of food waste, right? We know that there is enough food here. So why are people not able to afford food or get access to food? And I think this graph on the left is a really good example. So middle class wages overall have gone up 6% since 1979. I'm not great at math, but that is 21 plus 26, 47 years. Is that right? Someone over almost 50 years, we're talking about you've gone up 6%. Low wage workers' wages are down 5%, which that doesn't make any sense. And then those with very high wages saw a 41% increase. If you could just give me like a quick nod or shake of the head, does that feel equitable to you? No. Okay. Yeah, not really making a ton of sense here. So seeing a huge difference in wages. And then looking at the minimum wage, this is a great graphic, I think, of like productivity along with minimum wage, right? So how productive we've been able to be with the invention of like new technologies and programs. I think as well as the rise in education amongst our workforce, right? People are more educated. They're, perhaps more capable. So minimum wage, the real minimum wage versus the real hourly wage. So what most people are making, and then what it could or should be. So minimum wage would be over $18 if it had risen with productivity. So just keeping that in mind. Okay. And then really kind of the meat of what we're going to get into is the impacts on education, right? Like how does this impact our students or people experiencing food insecurity? So you have kind of three main impacts of food insecurity. So one would be your physical health issues, two would be school or work performance, and then three is the mental health issues. And these are all really tied together. They're a little bit hard to tease out sometimes. So you may see a fair amount of overlap amongst these. So, okay. So physical health issues, people with food insecurity are more likely, they have higher levels of diabetes and asthma. We talked about those chronic health issues, right? And how that's related to poverty, obesity, food insecurity, etc. Also may lack preventative care. We know that preventative care comes at a cost. But I also think about preventative care is a lot of times, right? Like eating right for your body, engaging in physical exercise. But again, if I'm experiencing time poverty, I may not have the time to engage in exercise, or I don't have the time to create, a healthy meal for myself, my family, etc. People with food insecurity are more likely to miss school or work days because of illness. They also have poorer sleep quality and fatigue overall. Um, how many of you feel super awesome when you aren't sleeping well? I'm going to say, yeah, I see some head shakes. No. Yeah. I do really well when I sleep 9 hours a night. I recognize that that's a lot of sleep. A lot of people don't get that much sleep. I don't always get that much sleep, but that is what my body prefers. I have a chronic illness, and sleep is one of the best things that I can do for myself. So when I'm not sleeping well, I'm not super productive, I'm not feeling great, it definitely impacts my overall physical health, which then, impacts my mental health. And also, if I'm not feeling well, then I can't go to work, et cetera, et cetera. And then we talked too about, the link between food insecurity and obesity. So, okay. Then thinking about school or work performance, people with food insecurity are more likely to experience impairment in learning and memory. I also think about how that ties into sleep quality, right? We know that in order for your brain to convert things to long-term memory, you have to be getting good sleep. You have to be sleeping. So that's an issue. Decreased energy, again, can be directly related to that physical health, difficulty concentrating, lower cognitive functioning and academic achievement, lower academic skills over time. And I think that goes back right to the missing school, right? If I'm missing a key information that then next week we're building upon, right? Like it's a skill level 1, and the next week we're moving to skill level 2. If I've missed skill level 1, how am I supposed to build skill level 2? I don't know how to get there because I missed the foundational knowledge. Then they also are more likely to have lower grades or GPA, and then they may be less likely to attend college or university. And then even if they do, or in high school and middle school, are less likely to join clubs, organizations, participate in extracurriculars, as well as just experiencing overall lower academic persistence. So we may be more likely to drop out or stop out. Something that I think is really important to highlight is that just because someone with food insecurity goes to college, they may not have the same collegiate experience as their non-food insecure peers, right? Amazing, super excited that they're there, right? They have like worked really hard to be there and already like overcome a lot of barriers to be there. So I don't mean this to be negative, but I do think it's important to be mindful of. So if someone with food insecurity is in college, they may be more likely to work, right? Which means that then they're not able to join clubs and organizations, because oftentimes college clubs and organizations expect you to treat that like your job, right? You have to be at certain meetings. If you want to hold a leadership position, you better be ready to dedicate, 15 plus hours a week to that title, that role, those job responsibilities. And if you're working and going to school or still helping your family, that may not be possible. And so that means that then you or that person, is graduating, but with not as many things on their resume, right? They may not get to say, oh, and I was a member of these 6 clubs, and I was president of this club, and I developed a great relationship with these 3 staff members, and I went to office hours and met my faculty, so my faculty can write me letters of recommendation for this job or graduate school or whatever the situation may be. So I think it's important to remember just still the amount of barriers there and the amount of supports needed in colleges to continue to assist these students. Okay. All right. And then you also have mental health issues associated with food insecurity. So behavioral problems. And I think a lot of that stems from, right, like if I'm not sleeping well, I'm not feeling well, I may be irritable. All of that makes sense to me. Impacts their ability to form peer relationships. Maybe just difficult to relate to their peers, Or maybe again, I'm not getting to spend as much time with my peers because I can't, join these clubs and organizations. Or you think about how often peer relationships depend on you have to be invited to someone else's home. And maybe that's just not something that like my home is capable of doing. Or maybe your way of hanging out as peers is going out to eat, and I don't have the money to go do that with you. Higher rates of depression, again, thinking about how poverty and all of those things are linked. Higher likelihood of anxiety and suicidal ideation. That is, again, closely related to just that stress factor related with food insecurity. Spend more time worrying about food. I think that's pretty obvious. Maybe more likely to use negative coping mechanisms. Experience isolation, and then may have adverse psychosocial development. And again, I think that's more related to that lack of sleep, the fatigue, not getting the nutrients that your body needs, just not being able to develop because of that. Okay, so moving on to kind of talking about solutions and like the work that we do at the Hunger Solutions Institute. So Hunger Solutions Institute is situated at Auburn University. We are a research center within the College of Human Sciences. We are focused on sort of three main priority areas, which are teaching, research, and service. We have a hunger studies minor, which consists of 2 classes, which one I just kind of affectionately call Intro to Hunger, which is hunger causes, consequences, and responses. And then a capstone course where every student kind of works on a project and gets to like dive into something that they find particularly interesting or are interested in learning more about as part of their capstone. And then I also teach currently an exploratory course in the Honors College called Food at Auburn. And we look at food at Auburn under a couple different lenses. So we talk about like food as community, food as health, food as environment, and then food as like business or industry, and kind of how all those different facets of food work together at Auburn. Then we do a lot of research. Those are tied into all of our different research priority areas, which I'll get into on the next slide. And then we do also keep or have a lot of graduate students that work with us. We're really, really lucky to work with a lot of great graduate students that are doing some amazing work. And then we also do a fair amount of service, and that is, again, tied into our programs and priority areas. So service to different communities. And then we have 7 programs through 3 priority areas. So I'll talk about each of those. So these are sort of our big priority areas. We have hunger and healthy food access. That is led by my colleague, Dr. Kara Newby. Hunger and food systems, that is led by Kate Fisher, Dr. Kate Fisher. And then hunger and higher education, that's me, Sarah Grace. So I am focused specifically on our education projects. So hunger and food access, that is like primarily Kara leads SNAP incentive programs. So one of the great things about SNAP is that they have done, a lot of research and data that shows that if you can like incentivize people to purchase healthier foods, they will. So there are a couple government programs that we have, some really big, amazing, like federal grants that allow people. So the first one is called Double Up Food Bucks. And we are the lead for Double Up Food Bucks in Alabama, which is a program where if I were a SNAP recipient and I went to a participating grocery store or what is the word I'm looking for? Farmer's market, I could purchase fresh produce and I would be able to double my dollars. So like I get a coupon to buy that like equal amount of produce up to a certain amount. So basically doubling my purchasing power, essentially. And then there's a similar program called Add Milk. That's a nationwide program, and it is basically the exact same thing as Double Up Food Bucks, but except Instead of produce, it is for fluid milk. So for what the USDA classifies as healthy milk. So I believe that is like skim and 2% only, or skim and 1%. I can't remember, and I'm really sorry. I should know that off the top of my head. Hunger and food systems, that work is primarily focused on the Healthy Food Financing Initiative. Just the best way I can describe that is like helping farmers in our area scale up kind of their business, right? So maybe I'm a small scale farmer and have the opportunity to provide cucumbers to my local school system, which amazing. That's so great. But in order to do that, I need some kind of like new farm equipment that's really expensive. The Healthy Food Financing Initiative helps me purchase that farm equipment at like a lower cost to me, or like lower interest rate, basically. So that I can kind of scale up my business and continue doing that and serving, my own community and keeping my farm here in Alabama. And then Hunger in Higher Ed, that's me. So I run a couple different programs. My biggest one is Hunger Free Higher Ed. Hunger Free Higher Ed is a program that 31 institutions across the state of Alabama are involved in. And that involves them sort of collecting data on what their campuses are doing in relation to food insecurity, and then helping them kind of scale up, right? So we figure out what's going on their campus, what they're doing well, and then where they could improve, and helping them move through that to take the next steps. And then I also do Presidents United to Solve Hunger, which is like a presidential level commitment to solving hunger and providing them programming. And then Universities Fighting World Hunger, that's college students who are really interested in food insecurity work, learning more about hunger as a whole and giving them opportunities to kind of plug in. This, I think, is particularly helpful, so I hope that you will make note of this. On our website, hsi.auburn.edu, we have an Alabama food map where you can put in your location, and it will tell you all the available resources in your area. So it will show your college food pantries, it will show any summer nutrition programs, your food banks, your farmers markets. If you have stores that are participating in Double Up Food Bucks or Add Milk, it would show you that. So I think this is a really great resource. Definitely encourage you to use that. Ooh, sorry. Well, no, I went the wrong way. If you want to write that down, again, that's hsi.auburn.edu. And that's a great resource. That food map is really great. And then this is just a kind of conglomeration of all our different programs. The only one I didn't talk about is In Child Hunger in Alabama. ECHA, as we call it. And ECHA is focused. They meet once a quarter to talk about child nutrition as a whole. So lots of food banks, child nutrition programs from the school systems, things like that, meeting and talking about just different needs and how to address those. So yeah, that doesn't necessarily fall into like one of our priority areas, but that is a program that we lead as well. So that's it from me. I know that was a lot of talking, but happy to answer questions now. I'm gonna stop sharing, I think, for the time being, but if anybody needs me to bring something back up, I can.
I do see a question in the chat
Okay.
from Monica Motley, and it says, what do you recommend as the best way to support students at a community college dealing with food insecurity?
Okay. That's a great question. So I think it will depend on where you are and what the resources are. Most of my community colleges have a participating food pantry now. Monica, if you want to share, if you have one, I'd be happy to talk more specifically about that. But I do think food pantries are a great first step. I would also highly recommend looking to see if the student is eligible for SNAP. You can't use SNAP on campus. So like if you had like a campus store, they wouldn't be able to use it there. But I do think that can be a great step as well. And then I would say encouraging them to use any like local food pantries, uh, things like that. And I'm happy to like help you figure out what those are if you want to email me, and we can talk more about like where you are and what's available. I do think community colleges, I will say, just if you don't know, have higher rates of food insecurity than your four-year university students. I'm sure a lot of you know that. So I do think that, that's a high, like a high population of food insecurity, and definitely can be tough because, as we all know, our community colleges often are like under-resourced, and our staff there wear like 17 hats for one job, and are just being required to do like more and more for their students. So, yeah.
I do have a question.
Mhm.
I think with all of this, after watching the presentation, sometimes we don't think about like maintenance being part of like, you know, just part of a success or, going into college and stuff. So do you have any thoughts on how we can like bring this conversation up and talk about it more? Um, so
Talk about it more with like a specific audience
yeah,
or
like
just in
the
general?
students to bring it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think one of the main things that I think is really important is that we like normalize it. I think, right? Like if we have food pantries on our campus, making them part of campus tours, right? So that people see them when they're on the tour and are like, "Oh, okay, I didn't think about that, but I'm glad to know that's available." So talking about it, making it seem more normal, so that it's not like stigmatized or something that people feel like they need to hide. I also think talking about it with like college administrations, I do think that administrations oftentimes want to act like it's not an issue at colleges, or like, oh, that's not happening here. Um, or sometimes we also have this experience. I've heard this from like several of my campus champions at universities that um, people feel like, oh, well, we have a food pantry. So, like, it should be fine. But as I mentioned, we know that people with food insecurity are not having the same college experience as people without food insecurity. And so I think offering them more than just the food pantry. And that doesn't necessarily have to be like at your campus, but there are like meal swipe donation programs. If you have a food pantry, making sure you have a list of other resources in the area. How to get on SNAP, what are the other food banks in the area. Um, if you have international students, they aren't eligible for SNAP. So thinking about what other programs they could use. Uh, are there like meal scholarships available? Can we talk to financial aid about other options? Um, just making sure that people are aware. And then I also think, thinking about if someone's food insecure, not necessarily, but they may be having other issues, right? Like, do they need to talk about like how to get more affordable childcare or something of that nature? So I think just having the resources like ready to go and just like up and available in your spaces so that people can collect that information when they need to can be really helpful. Yes, I would definitely recommend starting with your student services office, whether that be like your dean of students or if you have a basic needs center, or whoever that point person uh, available. Yeah, that would be a great first stop.
And Dr. Hall says maybe not normalize it, but more of an additional service that is available for anyone that has insecurities.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. And you're right, not necessarily normalize it, right? I'm not at all saying that people should just be food insecure. I think, I don't know if you guys get this, but like a lot of times, like, people my dad's age will be like, oh, well, I was a starving college student and that's normal. And it's absolutely not normal. You're right. That's not the right word. I think maybe what I mean is like to destigmatize it, right? It's okay to ask for help. And we certainly would rather people ask for help than, be experiencing food insecurity and not getting any support for it. So thank you for that. I really appreciate that, Dr. Hall, because that is not at all what I want to do or make people feel like, oh, this is just everyone's doing it, because that's not true.
Well, Sarah, do you have anything that once working with the Hunger Institute that, surprised you learning about while you're working at the Hunger Institute?
That's a great question. Um, I I don't know anything that like necessarily surprised me. I do think that, as different as all of our like institutions are across Alabama, right? We have a lot of rural institutions, we have several HBCUs, we have several PWIs, um, you know, 4-year, 2-year, et cetera, et cetera. We have a lot of different kinds of institutions, but we are all experiencing similar things. So I do a lot of calls that are just networking. Everybody get on kind of what's going on for you? What's going on for you? I also do one across the Southeast as a whole, and everyone's like, well, this is what I'm seeing. Are other people having that issue? And we'll have people, at like James Madison and the University of Florida who are like, yes, that's what I'm seeing that. I'm seeing that same thing. So um, I think the trends in food insecurity is something we're all seeing. I will say, as a whole in Alabama, we have a harder time getting students on SNAP than in other states. That's a common occurrence, and I think that's just how our like DHR interprets SNAP, and they're allowed to do that, but that is difficult. So just trying to find other resources and programming within the community. So if you work for a university or work for a community program, highly recommend that you become friends like with each other, whichever one you are. I think making those connections is probably one of the best things that you could do.
I see another question in the chat. It says, are you seeing food insecurities with students who have
Yeah,
meals?
who have meal plans. Yes. So good question. And yes, sometimes we do still see food insecurity amongst students with meal plans because not all meal plans are like all inclusive. It doesn't cover all meals. The other thing is that universities are not always open. Yes, especially on weekends and breaks. Yes, thank you, Carolyn. That's exactly what I was going to say. So I know specifically at Auburn, like we only have maybe one or two places open on Sunday, and it's only open from like 12 to 6. So that's surely not going to cover all my meals. And if that's the only place that I can eat, then that is not helpful. And sometimes at a lot of colleges, the only place that's open on Sunday is like Starbucks. And so maybe you can get a meal there. Maybe you just get a coffee and that's not food. So it's not always, yeah, it's not always as straightforward as you may think. And then again, if you have a meal plan, then oftentimes that automatically disqualifies you from being eligible for SNAP. So even though that doesn't cover your meal plan. Yes. And then a lot of students who live off campus are still required to have some semblance of a meal plan. But then they aren't eligible for SNAP because they do still like, on paper, yes, they have a meal plan, but it covers them getting like lunch, 3 or 4 times a week while they're on campus. And so that's not all their meals. That's not all their food. So yeah.
I'm hello. I don't know if y'all can see me. I am a high school JAG instructor, and so a lot of my students, like some of the barriers that they have to be with me are economic. And so our school does the full tummy project, like on Fridays, they send home a little bag of food with students. But the issue that I'm seeing is that we have students who really qualify who don't sign up for that. Like, I don't know if it's out of embarrassment or whatever, but I mean, it's very incognito how they get their bags. So, it's not like it's something that's so public that they're embarrassed. But in my classroom, I have been providing snacks and things like that, but that's all been out of my pocket,
Yeah.
which is, I mean, I'm feeding my family too, so that's getting kind of
So
expensive. Do you know of any like corporate partnerships in the state of Alabama with grocery chains or anything like that where we could maybe partner with them for things like that? Or,
I
even if
would,
it's like Nabisco and we get
yeah.
their expiring food hasn't
Mhm.
expired yet, but the stuff they
Yeah.
pull off the shelves, I just didn't know if you knew of anything available like that.
I will say, Kroger does a lot in the like food insecurity space. I would look into that. They oftentimes have like smaller grants, for like $5,000 or less that would, sustain you for a while to be able to provide snacks. I would actually recommend talking to your local food bank first. And if you don't know who your local food bank is, I would start with either Feeding the Gulf Coast or Heart of Alabama, which is your Montgomery area food bank. They'll connect you. They're both 10 out of 10, phenomenal. So start with one of them because you can oftentimes receive from your food bank, and that is like cheap, 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 and really great for students too. Other thing
I
I
know
will
our
say,
local food bank is like the church, all the area churches have one in our town. I'm in North Alabama, so um
not, no, no, no. So like they're probably getting food from like a big food
I
bank.
see. Okay,
Yeah, yeah,
okay.
yeah, yeah.
All right.
So start with them, because
Okay. That's good to know.
you could be a receiving site like those churches. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then the other thing I will say is I think a lot of times students don't sign up for programs like that because they think there are other people who need it more. So if you can in some way talk about, like we have the ability to serve 100 more students. We would love if more people would sign up, promote it in that way. I oftentimes tell people, like the reason I'm tracking what you're taking from the food pantry is not because I'm trying to be strict about it or because I care that you took 3 tunas versus one. Like it's simply the more that I can show that's going out, then the more I can show that we need, right? And then we can get more. And so sometimes people are like, oh, okay, great. Then I'll bring my friend with me tomorrow. So just kind of, again, not normalizing it, but talking about it in a way where people maybe understand like why you're collecting that data or who it's, not who it's going to, but if you get what I'm saying. Yeah,
Well, they don't mind rating my snacks in class, of course, because
of course.
everybody's doing it, not just
Mhm.
students who are insecure. But generally, I mean, every month when I'm paid as a teacher, like I'm at Costco getting like microwave popcorn and stuff like that, and I know that that is not sustainably great as far as food for kids goes necessarily, but it's better than an empty stomach.
Yes. So
Um,
that's what I always say. My first goal would be that you eat, and then like my second goal would be that you're eating like nutritionally sound meal, right? But my first goal would be that you eat something, period. And something that you like.
Yeah, I had some kids who made some suggestions, I was like, I have a suggestion box, like, what you want to eat, but then I was like, you can't blow my budget out of the water by this, but a lot of them wanted cuties, the little
Oh yeah,
oranges
that's
and stuff
great.
like that. And but I'm looking into it. I've got to reach out to our family owns a corn and apple farm in North Carolina. So I thought I might ask our cousin to send some apples,
Oh,
like
that's great.
just so we
Yeah.
have something, but those are things that have to be eaten in the moment, like they don't have a shelf life. So
Harder to keep that
that's why
like
popcorn's
fresher stuff.
easy because it has a great shelf life, you
Mhm.
know.
Yeah.
And a kid can eat a whole bag of popcorn and at least feel somewhat full.
Mhm.
So anyway,
Yeah.
I just thought I would ask. I didn't know if you
Yeah.
knew of
Thank you.
any specific partnerships, but I'll definitely check with the food banks to
Yeah.
start with. So, okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
So if we don't have any more questions, I would invite you to go to the next session. Just a reminder that you will get a little survey after we end this session. If you can fill it out, and we'll see you in the next session. Thank you so much. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Sarah, for this presentation today.
Yeah, thanks, you guys.